Good morning. It's great to be here today, and we are just to kick off a session of listening and learning on a really interesting aspects of sport in Canada, sport in your community, and sport globally. I am really honored today to have two guests with me to help us understand some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, and some of the things we need to do desperately to move sport forward. So on my left, Mr. Andrew Baker, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great to be here, Marty.
Thank you for making the time.
Thank
You know, we see that beautiful Olympic logo on you today. We know the Olympic Games are in full thrust, and we think it's a really special celebration to be able to talk during the Olympic Games, and as we cheer on our athletes and their coaches and the whole support team. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Always exciting to share the excitement of the games.
Oh, it absolutely is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your present role, but in the whole area of external affairs with the Canadian Olympic Committee. We'll dig a little bit deeper into that. And welcome, Marco. How about we say your last name correctly the first time?
Di Buono.
Di Buono.
There you go.
Beautiful Italian name and the land of espresso. That's a really great thing this morning to be sharing. Marco is the president of Jumpstart, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Jumpstart before we get started too. You'll recognize quite quickly that these are organizations, while they may appear to be very different on the outside, are doing some work that's really important together. So Andrew, if you wouldn't mind starting and sharing with us what you are doing, what you're up to, and how you got here.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Marty. And thanks again for having me. We're very familiar, so I should be Senator Deakin, but we've had such a long history in the games world. We've been through the games together a number of different ways. So I started at the Canadian Olympic Committee in 2005. I've now coming on to 21 years. I started in our games operations, which is where we crossed paths first as my first mission team in Rio 2007, where we spent a lot of time together. I have since worked through our operations team over the course of about 14 years, and then more recently, I've been leading our external affairs department of the Canadian Olympic Committee as we created that department and as it grew over the last 7 years.
Just with that in mind, in the department and the organization, you've been there, as you said, going on 21 years. The size of the organization, how has that changed over 2 decades?
It's been an incredible journey for both me personally, but mostly for the organization, and I've been so honored to be part of it. When I started at the Canadian Olympic Committee in 2005, we were a team of about 35. We were just in the midst of preparing for the Vancouver 2010 Games, and we were really refining, I would say, and professionalizing our games performance, our games operations, and really upping our service levels there. The Vancouver 2010 Games were transformative for the sports system in Canada, but also for our organization. So since that time, the Canadian Olympic Committee has grown to a team of about 120, and we've more than tripled our private investment in sport, thanks to the now 39 marketing partners that support the Canadian Olympic Committee. Many people don't realize we're almost exclusively privately funded, and we're an investor in the national sports system together with the government. So it's been an incredible journey. We've expanded our ability to both raise private revenue, but then also to have an impact not only on sport. And so we first kind of started in the games operations. That was our core business, but we've expanded into broader system supports, into supporting national sports organizations, direct to athlete support through Game Plan, and now into the external affairs space. And so it's been a really great evolution of the business as it built capabilities in a variety of different areas.
Thank you for sharing that. And what was the light that went on for you that decided you wanted to actually get into the sport area?
Yeah, well, I was an athlete as I was growing up. My Olympic moment, the one I channel when I think about why do we do what we do, is 1996 with Donovan Bailey, Bruni Stern, who were my heroes as a young track athlete, and watching them in Atlanta. I can remember sitting in my basement, it's marked in my mind, and saying, I need to go for a run. I need to train. And I went for a run, and this was the rounds of the 100, and then came back, sat in front of the TV, watched another round, said, I didn't train hard enough. I need to go and, do another lap around the block. And that for me is the power of what we do, is the power of the Olympic movement, is to move people, to get people active, to have them dream. And that's really the basis of my belief in the Olympic movement and my career.
Thank you. And through social media, you get to share your workouts.
I do.
Exciting workouts with you.
I'm no high performance athlete anymore,
No,
but I do.
still-
I do train in a CrossFit gym and try to push
Yeah,
myself.
that is
It's my
really great.
my new version of trying to find new goals. So,
No, that's
yeah, it's
really great. And Marco, the funny thing is about with Marco's surname is I always say Marco D. I think the world probably does, right? You probably have different names that you are called. We all have these abbreviations and pet names, so it's so great to have you here today. Can you just tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and how this all came to be for you?
Yeah, so I have the privilege of running Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities. I've been with the charity for 11 years, the last 4 in the leadership role. And as you know, we have a singular focus on helping kids access sport, physical activity, and recreation around the country. And to Andrew's point and to your point, the work that the Olympic Committee does, the work we do, many might think isn't connected, but the inspiration that Andrew talks about, our work is to try and make sure that there's capacity, there's ability in communities across the country to capitalize on that inspiration and give kids access, affordable, inclusive, welcoming access to whatever sport they so choose and they dream to be, a podium finisher on. They're not all going to get there, and this is why I chose to pursue work at Jumpstart. I have a passion. I've had a passion for child health and well-being for the longest time. I aspired to do other things in my career, but my path has led me to where I am because I believe in the power of sport to generate well-being for all Canadians, but in particular for children and youth. We know it helps them achieve better in school. We know it helps them manage their mental health. We know it improves their overall health and well-being. That's a no-brainer. So how do we focus on those outcomes? And for the few who will ultimately end up representing our country, it's a great outcome, but the benefit will impact everyone. And it's really a privilege to be able to work on getting kids access to those benefits.
You talk about your passion. Thank you for that. You talk about your passion and you're really clear about it, and you can see your eyes light up on that. It's wonderful. Where do you think that passion came in your perhaps formative years?
Yeah, I'm sure like many people who participate in sport when they were kids, I think back to the experiences I had growing up in Montreal playing hockey. That was my passion. I think every child in Montreal grew up playing hockey because, we had the Canadians as inspiration in the 70s and 80s. But it wasn't about any aspiration about playing professional hockey or making the NHL at the time. It was being surrounded by friends, having coaches who were mentors. It was learning skills. And we can say that now in hindsight because, we're adults and we can put adult words around what we were experiencing as kids. But I know that the passion we had for participating in sport at the time was about being together, right? And it extended beyond the rink and the dressing room and onto the streets where we were able to play, ball hockey together, and onto public rinks where we would join up at a moment's notice just because we could hang out with friends again. And so as I think about my journey, really wanting to work on the health and well-being of kids across the country, I can't think of a more important platform than sport as a powerful tool to give kids all the things they need to thrive, including giving them the skills that will ultimately lead to potentially careers and workplace opportunities for them. So the idea is don't leave it to chance. Our work, we approach our work with intentionality. Sport can be great. Sport can also be not so great. So we need to work with intentionality to make sure all those great outcomes are actually achieved with the right conditions for kids to be able to thrive.
So thank you. And with that, and you use the word capacity and intention. I think they're both amongst many words, very, very powerful. Can you give us a bit more of a sense of the work of Jumpstart, sort of coast to coast to coast? And if you see that, is it unique to a particular area? Are there areas that you feel that or activities are unique? Can you just give a sense across the country of things that you see north, south, east, west?
Absolutely. The reality is every community is different. And our work really centers youth in the way we show up in those communities. Mm-hmm. And dare I say, it's not even working with the adults, it's working with the kids directly, because when you listen to kids, you get a really good insight about what they're looking for, and you can really meet their needs in a different way. Look, from coast to coast to coast, there are affordability challenges, without question. Cost is the number one barrier to participation for every child, not just in Canada, but across the world. So our predominant focus is to work on affordability, and that's through community granting, whether we're providing funds to clubs that welcome kids at no cost or ultra low cost, whether it's providing infrastructure to meet, infrastructure gaps in communities, whether it's delivering equipment to overcome those barriers, transportation, you name it. But the other thing we're doing is also focusing, particularly through a gender equity lens, this notion of, if girls who play become women who lead, again, the intentionality there. How do we capitalize on the experience that girls and young women have in sport to really harness those skills that they're developing and help them progress towards a career in sport if they so choose? That's a smaller portion of the work we do, but regardless of where we are in the country, there are always nuances, right? So as I said, cost is a primary barrier, but as you get into remote and rural regions, you start to see things like transportation and infrastructure gaps rearing their heads as more significant challenges. There are issues with inclusion from a cultural and from an ethnic standpoint, from a racial standpoint. There are many challenges that many kids who are not from privileged backgrounds tend to face in communities across the country, and we have to address those systematically. But the most important thing that we are consistently fighting against is this disconnect between the supply, the way sport is supplied or provided, and what kids are looking for. You ask kids, and we've surveyed thousands and thousands of kids at a time, and they will tell you the first three things that they're looking for: fun, playing with friends, learning new skills. Competition's important,
Yes.
but it usually ranks, fifth or sixth on the list. But the way sport is offered up for kids across the country tends to be focused more on that competitive piece, and with objectives that are not necessarily aligned to what kids are looking for. So we're constantly working with community organizations to make sure that they're centering kids in the way they design sport. Again, there are nuances from one place in the country to another, but that is the number one thing that we tend to bump into as we try to do our work.
Thank you, and we'll dive a little bit deeper in that in a moment. And just before I come back to you, Andrew, your work, you had a 22 report done. I know you also had a new report we'll talk about, but can you just give us a really quick take on the learnings during the pandemic?
Yeah, and that was a turning point for us.
You're both ends, right?
Yeah, turning point for us, because what we learned as we surveyed community organizations across the country, and don't forget, sport, like schools, was one of the first things to shut down, last things to open. Many of the organizations that provide sport, they fall in this purgatory. They're not charities, they're not for-profit businesses, so they weren't eligible for a lot of the relief subsidies that were being delivered by different levels of government. What we learned right away is they just needed resources to keep the lights on at the beginning. But as they emerged from the pandemic, all of a sudden they had massive increases in their insurance premiums, in the cost of equipment. Like, inflation reared its head for them in the same way it did for every other Canadian household. And it really started to give us insight as to why cost was such a significant barrier. But rather than just throw money at the problem, we started to pay attention more to advocacy work that we could do to really address the root cause of that price escalation. So is there a way to mitigate insurance costs? Is there a way to get equipment in a more cost-effective way? Is there a way to reduce facility rental fees for different organizations? So when we talk about building capacity, it's partially about that, really getting to the root cause of the issues that are creating challenges for organizations. And that all stemmed from the work we did during the pandemic.
Thank you. No, it was a very important, an unfortunate, but a very important moment in time at which we need to adjust and think differently. So thank you so much for sharing that. Same for you, Andrew. Just a couple of things is that the pandemic and your work for the last 21 on, how did that shift?
Well, certainly the pandemic had a major impact on the games delivery. We saw the Tokyo 2020 games became Tokyo 2021, and that had a number of impacts on our Canadian athletes that had been training over a 4-year cycle. And it was impacting their day-to-day training environments prior to that postponement, and that was one of the reasons why the games were postponed, is just the global impact on athletes being able to train and be ready for those games. But then ultimately the sport federations as well were impacted by the pandemic, impacted by their ability to host events, which often were revenue drivers for the national sports organizations and allowed them to bring sport to Canadians to both view, but then also have Canadian athletes compete at home. So it had just, I think, a wide variety of impacts on the sport federations themselves. Marco talked about inflation. I mean, it hit everyone. It hit Canadians from coast to coast. It hit our sports organizations. You think about travel costs and getting teams to and from competitions. All of those costs increased at the same time as maybe some of the revenue sources were decreasing. So it was a multi-pronged impact on our national sports federations. It impacted memberships of the clubs, which impacts memberships of the federation. So really a broad-based impact, kind of across all levels of the system, both for Canadians, for just regular Canadians participating in sport, but also for our high performance athletes.
Thank you. And on a micro note, it is so special to see athletes that are in Italy now competing, that were in Beijing, saying, my parents are here, my family is here. And that's just, that's really important. But to actually hear them say that in the interview, even ahead of their performance and the performance goals, just the acknowledgement of that.
It's really special. I mean, every Olympic environment is special and unique, but we saw it in Paris with those athletes who had competed in Tokyo without family and friends in the stand, or frankly, any fans in the stands. And also in Beijing. And it's been really great to see the winter team have the same experience for those that have continued on. No,
it's really nice to see. Now, basically, the Canadian Olympic Committee over the last couple of decades has, your vision, you're talking about the work you're doing, basically had two goals. And the goal that I think Canadians would see more, more strongly or overtly is the goal around performance and how we prepare for games and how we have our best games performance. The other goal, which also has been there, and of course it comes right back to the IOC Charter and Mr. Coubertin, all the history, is how we use sport, how we use the games to promote Olympic values, to build, to unite communities. And you know where I come from. This has been an important goal for me for my 25 years with the COC, but I'm delighted to see it more forward facing. So I know that is your desk now. So I would like you to, if you could share with us a little bit how that is working, and they're not separate. I would continue to tell Canadians, these aren't separate. These are very symbiotic, very symbiotic goals. So really happy to see it, and tell us a little bit more about how you're trying to bring that to life.
Yeah, great. And as you mentioned, the Olympic Charter specifies that every National Olympic Committee is preparing teams for games and for the Olympics and the promotion of the Olympic values. So that's been baked into our mandate, our mission, our vision since the creation of the organization. But what we've done recently is we've looked at the second part of that mission and said, how do we connect these two aspects in a much stronger, much more cohesive way with a much more strategic focus? And so we recently, 2 weeks ago, we launched Team Canada 2035, which was the product of years of discussions with our board internally, with our stakeholders, with our system, with the athlete community to say, how do we strengthen our connections of the platform that we have, the Olympic environment, the inspiration generated by incredible Canadian athletes to Canadians from coast to coast to coast. That's been focused on values, but what we've said now is we want to really try to frankly, what I was talking about in my inspiration is not just let that happen anecdotally, but to make that intentional. And so we have the platform, and we want to drive people who are viewing sport into sport itself. Marco has talked about access and ensuring that so these are all parts of the ecosystem that we want to look together. So our strategy, Team Canada 2035, looks at continuing to support our Canadian athletes. We want more support for our athletes to achieve their goals on the world stage, provide more inspiration to Canadians.
Excuse me, it's a 10-year plan.
10-year plan. Yeah. So it's a 10-year vision, and our goal, so Team Canada 2035, is to see Canada as a top 5 nation in combined medal counts between summer and winter. But really what that's reflective of is an ambition to continue to support Canadian athletes and see them succeed, achieve their goals on the world stage. The second part is to then channel that inspiration into 1 million more members of Canadian sport federations. So those are our membership. That's who is the membership of the Canadian Olympic Committee. We want to see more Canadians in organized sport as members of the member federations, It's a way for us to help support the foundation of the system, working with groups like Marco, but with our national sports organizations who will work with their provincial federations, their clubs, to get more of these Canadians. And then the third part is Planet, and to really protect our sporting environments, use our platform to advocate for climate action. And we see the impact of climate change on our sporting federations, on our athlete performance, regardless whether it's in the summer with heat, whether it's in the winter with lack of snow. So Podium, Play, Planet are the three pillars. But really what it looks at is an intentionality between leveraging the inspiration into participation, and working and providing our resources to help the system, and to work with the system to generate that using our platform. So we're really excited about it.
Must be, yeah,
Yeah.
really excited. And you're just getting on the front end.
Yes, we
look
just
forward to
announced
seeing
it.
more on the
Yeah.
website and seeing what it means. I like the graphic, but
Yeah.
it's exciting to see that. Question for you, because it's important to have data, it's important to have evidence, right, as you drive. As a president, as a former running a national sport organization, one of our biggest challenges for a variety of reasons was getting accurate membership numbers.
Yes, absolutely.
And Sport Canada needed this, like they needed its participation, the whole gamut. So across the country, it was hard to get that.
Yeah.
Are you finding that you're able to, because, listen, this is part of our plan, this is really important, that you are optimistic you'll be able to get that baseline data that helps you see the evidence of your work?
Yeah, I think working with partners, I think there's a lot of people who have recognized that need. It's not new, as you
No,
mentioned, it's a
absolutely not.
longstanding need.
Yeah.
What I would say is this plan has allowed us to be part of those conversations and to identify where we can play a role in supporting that. So absolutely, that is, I think, a need for the system and something that we will be building on, because you do need to understand where people are participating, where they want to be participating but can't, and how do we orient a system towards driving more people into sport and taking advantage of those opportunities. So we will play a role in that. That is not a COC. The COC will not try to do that alone. But what it does is it puts in our mindset, how do we leverage our resources, our platforms to be a great partner to our members, the national sports organizations and other organizations in the system to help deliver that. So starting with the baseline and then growing from there.
That's exciting, really, really exciting. And we're hearing, we're going to come to this, I'm hearing like visions, the goals, the intent of Jumpstart, the intent of your organization, and moving towards our need for what we would call our common purpose, our common vision for sport in Canada. So I'm just gonna rotate around that in just a couple of minutes and see if we can do that. Marco, for sure, you mentioned absolutely crucial in all of this is the opportunities for families and children to experience the very best of playing sport. In the beginning, you played primarily, you said, for fun, for friends and for fun, but not competition. So I wonder if you could take this moment to highlight a little bit the very recent release document, the State of Sport in Canada. You touched on it earlier, but the value and the cost of participation, the information you have effective in 2025, what did the team that was working on this seek to find answers to that help Canadians understand the barriers and choices from a family and youth perspective?
Yeah, thank you for this. So there were two things. We deployed two large surveys last year. One, again, centering the youth voice, asking them, what do you play? Why is it you play? What do you wish you could play? And what's preventing you from doing that? So really getting at the supply-demand question. And then the other piece we needed to get a better understanding of was the cost. So we did a survey of over 6,000 parents to ask them at a very granular level, not just what do you spend, but what do you spend on registration? What do you spend on equipment? What do you spend on transportation, travel, et cetera? And why? What do you see the value of sport being? And what we learned was phenomenal. So obviously when we center kids, again, as I mentioned, fun, friends, skills, top reasons why they want to play. It's happy to share, because we're co-hosting the World Cup in a few months. Soccer is now the most participated sport in Canada amongst children and youth. Soccer, swimming, basketball in that order. It's great to see with the demographic shifts, with the interests, and with the cost pressures that these are the sports that kids are gravitating to because they're accessible. But for parents, the thing that really caught us, and we were glad to see this, despite the mounting costs, and families are spending about an average of $3,000 per year to keep their kids in sport, and they're over leveraged in doing that, by the way. It's not, sounds like well, they're not too high. It's a lot for most families right now to be able to do that. And they're prioritizing sport over other family needs because they understand the value. And this was really reassuring. 96% of parents tell us they do it because they see the physical health benefits. 93% of parents say they do it because of the mental health benefits. I was so happy our entire team was so happy to see those results, because what it means is parents aren't being lured into this false sense that there's a goal at the end that is, unrelated to the well-being of their kids. This isn't about professional sport aspirations. It's not about scholarships to university. Those are great outcomes. But the fact that most families, the overwhelming majority of families, see that immediate impact to their children's well-being, and that's why they're so committed to keeping them in sport, it was immensely reassuring.
Very
So
good. It's nice to hear that, and
yeah,
have that
so-
data in front of you and have the input from families, from parents, from kids. That's what also, I think, makes that a really rich report.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing it. So for both of you, and I'll, continuation of this, we know and we've been presented with all kind of data over the years that reminds us sport is good for your health. We could continue digging that data. We know it is. The other areas that we're looking at, good for your physical mental health, we know that's important to Canadians. But from your leadership perspectives, can you expand on a little bit more about how sport is essential in other areas? The economy, diplomacy, the wider thought on this. Would you mind starting?
Sure, and I think this is one of the interesting things about sport, and we often only take one lens when we look at it, and I think it's really important to take a broader view of the multifaceted benefits that sport provides. It is an expression of our country on the world stage when we think about Team Canada. It's important, it's an aspect of it defines our pursuit of excellence, our values, our sovereignty. Our Canadian values show up in many ways, not just in winning, but in how, if you look at our women's hockey team right now is playing against Finland in a game that was delayed. I mean, that was a decision to focus and prioritize the health. It was the Canadian team accepted to delay a game. Even before the game started, we had examples of how Canada shows up in the world stage. So I think that's important. It builds bridges. And I've been involved in a number of conversations and sat around a number of tables with different partners that are often confrontational in the way that they work with each other. And what sticks with me is I've heard this multiple times, is it's nice to sit around a table and talk about something positive. It's nice to talk about opportunity. How can sport impact? So whether that's in the diplomatic, it is absolutely a diplomatic tool. We see it in action with our government of the day, with FIFA. We see it at the Olympics consistently. Health, mental health, immigration, integration. One of the programs that my team supports is the IOC Refugee Olympic Team athletes that are based in Canada, and just the amazing inspiration and the values that they demonstrate, not only of Canadian values in bringing refugees into Canada and integration, but also the ability to highlighting the strength and the power and the inspiration of refugees and what they are doing and what barriers they're overcoming. It's incredible. And so it's just a multifaceted tool in our arsenal as a country to really advance a number of different priorities. And I think this is an emerging aspect of how we're looking at sport as a national sport community, but then in the partnership with government. And how do we leverage sport as a tool for advancing government priorities and community priorities across the country? So,
absolutely. Thank you for that. And Marco, maybe if you could touch on that economic and the diplomacy and really, give us your perspective there.
Well, and we've made the statement before that investing in sport is a matter of economic prudence, and the numbers don't lie. Excluding professional sport, the value that sport participation contributes towards Canada's GDP in present day is $9 billion of economic activity. There's an additional $11 billion in tangential retail activity that is associated with that participation. So footwear and apparel and equipment. So that's $20 billion of economic activity directly attributable to sport participation at an amateur and community level. there are other, and that's not just not an aggregate number that people can't wrap their heads around. These things actually trickle down into communities. There are groups, I recall leading into the pandemic, there was a coalition of folks in Calgary, the Active City Collective, that looked at the microeconomic impact of sport participation in the sport economy in Calgary. 32,000 jobs is what they quantified as directly attributable to the broader sport economy in the city of Calgary. These are immediate economic benefits for every city at a time when we need that. We need to be firing on all those cylinders. We ignore it at our peril. That happens without sport being a policy priority for different levels of government. Imagine what would happen if we made it a policy priority. It could help elevate Canada's overall economic well-being at a time when we need to be doing that to levels that we haven't seen historically, while simultaneously improving the health and well-being of every person participating in sport.
If I could, if you don't mind, let's get into the nitty-gritty for both of you, a bit of the nitty-gritty on that. So absolutely, this is what's almost happening in spite of a collective effort, in spite of a common, really understood, articulated purpose and goal, vision. So, and our sports system needs some help. It needs some help. I don't think it's any secret. There's things we can be doing and doing better. We know we have the Future Sport Commission. We're looking forward to their final report. But I also think we anticipate some of those big buckets that will be coming forward in the Future Sport Commission. So when you're talking about what you just mentioned, Marco, what do you see as might be some fairly quick fixes and long-term?
Yeah. Well, collaboration. So, you mentioned data earlier. There is work that is underway between Jumpstart, the Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee, a number of entities within the sport ecosystem, and not just at the national or provincial level, but at the grassroots level, to have a better sense of what data or what the participation rates look like, where we're investing our money so that we can make better decisions and not inadvertently overlap with each other. So that business intelligence, that's working. We are collaborating on even what those investments look like. So the data that we showed clearly indicates that schools are the most accessible and least costly space for kids to participate. How do we now work together to find ways to make that space available and accessible for all the sport organizations at the community level to be able to provide affordable opportunities for children to be able to play. But beyond that, we are going to need a little bit of help to shore up some of the gaps we know exist. We're going to need a more aggressive approach, with federal government support, with provincial governments, and even municipal governments to make sure that all the standards we need around safe sport and equity and inclusion are there. Look, sport is a human right. We have codified in Canada the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. One of those rights is access to play and sport. And so it behooves us to treat access to sport as a human right for these kids, which means we have to ensure their safety. We have to ensure the integrity of the system. We have to ensure affordability. We're going to need policy levers that help us do that at various levels of government, and strict ones so that we can ensure that any child, any adult who wants to access the sport ecosystem can do so without any concerns for their well-being.
Just before, Andrew, I come back to you. So I'm going to use the word courage, and I'm also thinking about some islands of excellence, so that we do have some leaders and some folks in this country that, frankly, whether it's in spite of, are looking at efficiencies before they're looking at increased funding. They're looking at ways that they can do their business better. But that requires courage, and that requires trust. So I'm just thinking what you just said, and even wondering how we create that environment so that people recognize a transformational change, not always just a flow of money and increasing funds. Of course, that's very, very important. But that mindset piece and the ability to try, to fail, to say, here are some of the things we need to run and do sport in 2026. they're not what we did in 2016 or 2000. I'm just wondering if you care to elaborate on that, and Andrew, you'll be next, of course.
I think Andrew kind of touched on it, right? It's the goal and the vision that the COC has set over the next 10 years. It's not exclusive of the goals that we have as an organization. And even the podium finishes, because quite frankly, the more inspiration we have for youth to want to participate in sport, the more we can with the right conditions on the ground, the more we can capitalize on that. Obviously, wanting to get more participants in the system, there's a big Venn diagram intersect there.
Yeah.
But even the environmental or the larger issues around climate, those impacts, if there's no leadership looking at how we address climate in sport at the national level or international level, how are we going to create safe conditions for our kids? They're subject to the same environmental challenges and pressures that elite athletes are. And there too, though, there aren't any standards that consistently make sure that those kids are safe. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to find the common ground and focus on that as an ecosystem versus trying to work independently from one another, because the strength is in the numbers. The more allies we have working around the table to systematically tackle, whether it's something as granular as data or something ambitious as we want to get as many Canadians moving as we possibly can, we need to find the common ground. And it's to our detriment if we focus on the things that separate us versus the things that bring us together.
Thank you. I think about, as you're speaking and as we're talking today, I do think a little bit of some pieces from that commission report. And one talks about an entity. One talks about the possibility of an entity. Andrew, thoughts on that?
I think these are all conversations we should be having, is what is the right structure, how do we modernize, how do we innovate a system, and how do we build a system that's fit for to your point, Marty, that's fit for sport in 26 and beyond as we look forward. You asked about what are some of the immediate things versus what's forward. I think one of the first things we need to do is to really be clear as a system on what is our vision and what is our objective.
Yes.
Because I think that's really an important starting point to then understand how we build the system to deliver on those objectives. We've seen success at the national level in doing that with On the Podium. On the Podium had a clear mandate. It came out of a clear assessment that we were the only country in the world to have hosted the Olympic Games and not won a gold medal on home soil. And we did it twice. And we said we don't want to do that in Vancouver. And so the system came together, looked at what needed to happen, what needed to be true for us to win a gold medal on home soil On the Podium, and ultimately to be the #1 country in the Vancouver Games. And we won a record number of gold medals, 14, and the system started with a goal and oriented and organized behind that goal. That was a high performance goal. It was clearly the mandate of the national and the federal level jurisdiction. It had provincial impact for sure, but it oriented the federal institutions towards that goal and created On the Podium as an organization. I think that's what we need to look at. What is the value when we talk about connecting high performance and grassroots? We do want to continue, I think, to support Canadian athletes and to succeed on the world stage. It's important. We see it with our women's hockey team. We see it with our women's soccer team, just as two examples who have consistently performed at the world stage and now have professional leagues in Canada. I think that those would be harder to come by if we weren't winning bronze medals and gold medals in Tokyo. And so these pieces need to fit together, and we need, I think, a vision and a set of objectives for the sports system, even if it's just at the national level, that we can orient. So to go to your point about a national entity, I think that's an important conversation in the context of what are we trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I would take it a step further too. I mean, we talked about it earlier. You asked about the economic impacts, the global diplomacy impacts. I mean, we don't need to over-engineer what that vision looks like. I think we generally have agreement within the ecosystem that it's about well-being, and there are other outcomes that can be. The more people we have participating, the more we're going to have a robust, pool of athletes who are going to want to or going to be capable of representing us at an international level. We have to think about the economic impacts, as we chatted earlier. And there is a global diplomacy piece that comes into play. If we start to host more international events here, we participate in more international events. Exporting brand Canada is a good thing for all of us. So generally, I think the vision can be articulated relatively quickly, and there would be alignment pretty quickly. But before we decide, do we need an entity, do we not? That's what we need first. Form follows function.
Right.
So we really need to decide the vision. We need to decide what it is we're going to achieve as part of that. Like, do we have goals that we want to achieve in terms of participation, in terms of economic gain? And then we can decide what is the mandate of whatever that entity is, and how is it going to be structured to help us achieve those broader outcomes.
Yeah, the form and function is tremendously important. And our municipalities and our provinces and territories, right, in the past, with great effort, they're still disconnected. How do we look at making that move along? I would be candid to you. I have dreams before I finish being a senator. And one is that we own the playground, and we own the podium. And we define what that means and what that looks like. The other one is we have 24-hour access, but maybe not quite, in schools and recreation centers, coast to coast to coast. The other is that we look candidly and really courageously at efficiencies in 2026 moving forward. It's really quite aligned with your 10-year vision, and how we do and how we look at that efficiently, and that we can be really confident that kids are, all young people, all people feel safe and feel included and feel connected and welcome. And then go. I mean, those are. I know they're lofty, and that we use schools better with the daily, some of the quality activities, daily physical activities that happen in some provinces, but not others. There's work there that I think we can do better with. You touched on something I also wanted to ask you about, the topic of the, and so you do get people saying, yeah, or not in my backyard, or how do we do this and do this well together? And you've been dedicated to this work.
Mhm.
I mean, we've had two goes with Calgary and Vancouver, Whistler, Canada, like the combination out west. So my question is, not why were they not like successful, but what have you taken from those moving forward? Because again, I'm sure it's gonna be part of what we see in 2035 fine print, but what is it you take from those and learnings moving forward?
Maybe just going to your previous point before I answer that
Sure.
question, Marty, is I do think there's a great opportunity for Canada to become a leader in connecting high performance success to grassroots participation. That's the essence of our Team Canada 2035. But as a system, I think there's an opportunity for us, and the pieces are slowly coming into play with the Future of Sport Commission, with the new sport policy, and I think with a willingness from partners to modernize, to innovate, and a willingness from the government, frankly, to invest in sport and to see a sport system that reflects the ambition that the government has set. So I do think the pieces are coming into play, and there's a great opportunity for us. We're in the middle of the Milan Games.
Yes.
We're getting inspired as a country, but then we have the World Cup coming up. This is a great year for sport, and I think a great year to unveil a vision and to move the system forward and to really drive transformative change in the system, to drive transformative change for the country. So I'm excited about that. That's what kind of gets me out of bed every day. And I know there's a number of partners that are doing that. And doing that same work and are committed to it. So I think we'll get there, Marty.
Good.
We'll get there for you, Senator Deakin. Thank you. On the bidding front, this is part of an ambition for the sports system, and it's part of a look forward, and it's part of saying what do we want sport to deliver and drive in our country. The Olympic Games are one of the biggest sporting events in the world. They drive unparalleled attention to a country, to a city, to a host region, and Canada is well equipped to host games in the future, whether that's winter or summer. We could do both. At the Canadian Olympic Committee, one of our mandates is also to approve and sanction Olympic bids in this country. We've become much more intentional following the bid process in Calgary to do that work, to work with municipalities, with provinces, with the federal government to create the right conditions to allow for games to develop and to deliver value for communities. That's the number one priority. There's a lot of opinions.
30 seconds. Just about.
Okay, perfect. There's a lot of opinions about bidding. I will just say it's important to look at the facts and the Canadian context and what a games can do for a host city and a host province, not to necessarily to look at all of the other examples, because everyone has their specific context. We have a great history of leaving impactful legacy for communities. We're 50 years out of Montreal, and there's still facilities that are used on a daily basis by Montrealers every single day, thousands of Montrealers. Same in Calgary, same in Vancouver. These are the legacies that we want. It's part of a broader vision for the system and for the country. And so we've set an ambition to host the games again in the future, and that sets a platform for us to work with the various levels of government to see how games can advance their priorities.
Well, thank you. And speaking of legacies, and I know our time just flies, but I would love to have a longer time. The legacy here on the Hill is National Health and Fitness Day. So that was taken from Vancouver. And so as a senator, I will continue relentlessly to try to get the awareness with parliamentarians, to try to get them caring about their own health, but asking some of the tough questions in their own communities. What is our infrastructure? How are we making sport and activity available to new Canadians, to all Canadians? What are we doing in the way of facilities? How about a bid? Canada Games, Summer Games, Ontario Games, Olympic Games. And so I am motivated and really thank both of you for joining us today. It is a big effort, but if we're working in the same direction and we have a common and pretty simple set of purpose and vision, I think we can get this. So thank you, and congratulations to the work that both of you are doing. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.